Hi, this is Sergeant Betsy Brantner Smith with the National Police Association, and this is part two of my interview with retired Supervisory Special Agent John Nantz. John and his friend Chris Hinkle had the opportunity recently to sit down with the FBI Director, Kash Patel, at FBI headquarters and talk about so many different issues. And John Nantz, who also writes for Restoration News. He writes for Town Hall. He's got a phenomenal Substack. He was able to sit down with us and talk about how that interview came to be, and also talk about some of the many, many issues that Director Kash Patel spoke with him about. So I hope you enjoy part two. And one of the things that you just mentioned it, and one of the things you talked to the director about was, when in talking about equipment and resources and stuff, we think, oh, the FBI just has more money than God, right? Yeah, and I was surprised to hear the director talk about that the budget had stayed the same for, I believe, 6 years, the last 6 years. And
Right.
finally, he has been able to put together a budget. I don't think it's been approved yet, but put together a budget that's really more realistic. And I think a lot of that would be certainly equipment,
Mhm.
technology. And one of the things he talked about too was support staff. The
Mhm.
FBI just isn't a bunch of agents. You have got to have analysts and administrative assistants, and I mean, there's so much support staff
Mhm.
that the FBI has. And he also talked about some pay raises and things like that. Talk about that budget aspect of it that a lot of people don't really think about.
Well, the FBI's budget is in the billions of dollars, which is a tremendous amount of money. But comparatively speaking, like to the CIA or DHS or some of these other federal, or certainly, the Department of War, I'm still trying to get used to calling it DOW, which is I think awesome as opposed to calling it DOD. But anyway, compared to those budgets, the FBI's budget is relatively speaking, somewhat modest. And I really noticed that quite a bit when I worked with some agency people in when I was a counterintelligence agent with regard to the procedures for paying assets or individuals that we were paying for information, right? So I had to go through this really laborious process to get money to pay an asset, and these agency people were literally going into a safe and pulling out cash. And so that's just a little sort of window into, how the difference in what kind of money that, we're talking about.
Well, and wait, let me just tell you a quick story from the 1980s when I was in narcotics. The FBI went through this period of time in the mid 80s where this is when everybody's trying to take cocaine off the street, all of that. And we, the locals in our DEA task force, when we needed more money back then, we could go to the FBI, and they had even more cash than the DEA, than the state police, all of that. So things kind of go up and down, right, in trends.
Yeah. Yes. What you said back in the 80s, right? Is that what you
Yeah,
said? Yeah. So where was all the congressional funding going? Drugs.
right.
So that was the big thing. That's when the FBI got into drugs. I mean, we have a whole separate federal entity that does nothing but drug investigations, right? But everybody's got to get their hand in the till. So the Bureau stood up a bunch of drug squads. If I rem I don't know if I remember correctly, but at the height in the 80s in Miami, I think there were probably like 20 drug squads, maybe not quite so many. Now it's a handful, maybe two, three drug squads. So you can see after 9/11, what was the priority? Counterterrorism.
Mm-hmm.
That's where all the congressional funding was going. And of course, that was sort of the Bureau's bailiwick. So tons of money for counterterrorism operations. So back in the 80s, that's why you saw
Yes,
that.
we benefited from that back
Yeah.
in my day. And and I'm glad you brought up 9/11/01, because in your interview with the director, you guys talked about that whole atmosphere of protecting the homeland.
Mhm.
And that term Homeland Security, and of course the actual organization, happened after, post 9/11/01. And I think there's kind of a, again, you tell me, I heard a re-emphasis on that, protecting the homeland, because again, this is one of the things I want people to recognize. You got your FBI, your field office has got to go to, Joe's bank that just got robbed, and yet you're also trying to literally keep people from blowing up the country. I mean, and everything in between. Talk about that.
Yeah, I don't know if you caught yesterday, Patel just came out and said that and this is a brand new statistic that's been released. I think it's 716 terrorist plots foiled in this last year alone. See,
Extraordinary.
that's another aspect of the astounding transparency. You never would have heard about these numbers before. And some of that was politics because, Biden's big, existential threat during his administration was white violent
White
extremists.
supremacy,
Yeah,
right?
there you go. Yeah, you should be on the terrorism screening, the TSA list, just for being a white female, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
and look, there's so many of us out in the field that were like, this is complete nonsense and garbage. There's no foundation in fact for this. This is pure politics being driven from the White House to DOJ through Christopher Wray and before him Comey, right? So,
Before we keep going, I want you to remind everybody, because I want to do this right in the middle. Where, if so, somebody's watching this right now, John, when we're done, where can they go find this time that you spent with Director Patel?
well, the whole interview has been posted to the official FBI's YouTube page.
Mm.
So you can find it there, or you can go to my Substack. I have it there with some commentary and some photographs, some inside photographs. So if you want a little bit more of that type of thing, you can go to my Substack at John Nantz, at the John Nantz. You can go to any of my social media on X or Facebook or LinkedIn or
I know
Instagram.
you're everywhere.
You gotta be, right? If you're gonna, you gotta be everywhere. So you can go to any of those platforms and you can find links to my Substack with some of that other additional information. Or you can go to the FBI's YouTube, so you can see the whole interview there.
Awesome. Awesome. So let's keep going, because this was, you guys just covered so much. And one of the things you did, part of the interview is you guys walking around with the director and him talking about so many of these issues. And one of the things that he talked about was the real-time information that
Hmm.
he is able to provide leadership in this country, which I was really astounded by that. Can you tell, because we always see, whether it's the president or the cabinet, in the situation room, or we hear about an active shooter situation or a terrorism situation, and the reporter always says, and the president is being briefed. The president has been briefed. Talk about how that actually happens.
So the interview took place in the DISC, or the Director's Strategic Information Center. So that's never been photographed or videoed
Yeah.
before. So it was very, very cool to be able to do that. It used to be called SIOC, Strategic Something Information Center, Strategic Operations
Mm-hmm.
Information Center. And that had been developed, I think, back in the 80s, and it had become very anachronistic. And literally, when a crisis would occur, you'd have people shouting across the room at each other trying to get information to the right place. So it's just create, just
Like a
something,
movie. Yeah.
yeah, something needed to be done. So this is one of Patel's, I think, flagship reform efforts, and it is so impressive. The individual who has been managing this actually modeled the disc on combat operations centers in theater in Afghanistan and Iraq. So, you think it would be common sense, but it's not. So you literally have an intake station, and then the rest of the actual ergonomics of the disk adheres to the information flow. So you don't have people yelling across the room at each other. There are also elements of technology that have been really, really nicely developed. There's basically a messaging system that connects all of FBI leadership. So whenever you have a critical incident, you have a case agent on the ground. First thing that happens is that individual's phone blows up with his supervisor, the ASAC, the SAC, and if it's really big, you got people from headquarters calling, "Hey, what's going on? What's the latest details?" Right? So now they've eliminated that kind of stovepiping, and the last thing you want is your guy or girl, lady on the ground being inundated with questions from supervision when they're trying to deal with in real time
Yeah,
a
the actual
developing crisis.
crime.
Exactly right. So there's this messaging system that eliminates all that. They can all go immediately to that messaging system and see exactly what's coming from the field. So the field just puts it in essentially to this messaging app, and then everybody has access to it. Common sense, right? Common sense, right? So Patel has been implementing all these things. Another very, very interesting point about the disk. And you saw this early on in Patel's administration. There were a couple of times where the FBI kind of came back to the White House with, well, this is developing. We'll get back to you momentarily, right? You don't want to hear that. You're President Trump, right? You don't want to hear from your FBI, hey, give us a second. We're still working
Hold
on it.
on, sir.
Yeah, exactly. Keep your pants on. We're working on it, right? So what has happened? Um, the channels through which information flows have been greatly reduced. Previously, there were up to like 7 layers of approval and sort of information management that stuff had to go through. So you're getting these inordinate delays. Now that it's been reduced to where the FBI director will be informed within 30 to 60 seconds of a developing situation. They actually showed me this little card. It's like a little briefing card, and the individual who's running or who's kind of heading up the disk right now has the authority to break in any meeting, any discussion, if there is a developing occurrence. And the director will kind of have the bullet points within 30 seconds to a minute because they know the White House will be calling within 2 minutes. I mean, this is exactly how it was explained to me. So they know the time window they have to get their ducks in a row and to be able to appropriately advise and inform the White House with regard to some domestic incident. So it just I can't say enough good things about it. I mean, compared to the old SIOC, I mean, it's just no comparison whatsoever. And it's an illustration, a concrete illustration of how Patel is being very forward leaning, how he's open to new ideas. Uh, you know, um, One of the things he said in the interview, and I have mentioned it in a Restoration of America column
Mhm.
that came out just a couple of days ago. Essentially, he said that if your response is, "This is the way we've always done it," that is not the right response,
I
right?
loved that because for anyone who's watching or listening that has worked in a big organization or has worked in the government bureaucracy,
Right.
what are we always told? Well, that's just the
Right.
way we do it.
That's the way
And
we do it,
and
right?
and I loved what he said. And that really does. You're right. That speaks to his not only his transparency, but to his ability and his desire to make positive changes. Again, all those positive changes that go back to transparency and crime fighting. Crime
Right.
fighting. He talked about
Mm.
that a lot. That yes, the FBI is back, you know, taking care of the American people and putting bad guys in jail and things like that, as opposed to being and you talked about this in the beginning, this politicized, closed up shop.
Well, that's a really important, I think, component of Director Patel's vision for the FBI. And he said this, and people criticize him when he says, "Well, we're letting cops be cops." Well, the FBI agents aren't cops. Well, okay, yeah, we don't respond to calls for service on the street like traditional cops do, but the Bureau is very much part of the law enforcement community, a very big part. And so I don't think it's going too far to say, well, I'm letting cops be cops, or essentially I'm letting FBI agents be agents and do their job. That's what Patel is saying, and he's expressing it in the vernacular so everybody gets it, right? It's easy concept. So that's very important to him. That's very clear that it's important to him. And critics can say whatever they want to, but these statistics are absolutely burying them. I mean, 40,000 violent crime arrests this last year alone. That's not the exact, I think it's a little bit higher. I think it's like 44,000, I don't know, something
Mm-hmm.
like that. And I asked him specifically because I've heard people say, "Oh, those aren't FBI numbers. You know, those are numbers that's a conglomeration of numbers from local law enforcement and other partners." I asked him that specifically, and he said, "No, these are FBI numbers." And people will say, well, how does the FBI impact or murder rates, right? The FBI doesn't investigate murders. Well, that's exactly right. It's a local law enforcement function to investigate homicides, but the FBI has impacts in many other ways. And taking gang members off the streets, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You think that doesn't impact the homicide numbers? It certainly does directly. So the Bureau has a very far and broad reach in terms of national crime statistics and its impact. And the other thing that people don't talk about is the leadership effect of the FBI, right? So if you've got the bureau that is uh, re re retooled and repostured to uh, to really tackle the criminal component of the FBI's portfolio, that trickles down, I think, to state and local law enforcement. I think it's I think it's a morale boost. You see the FBI's influence a lot in the in firearms selection.
Mm-hmm.
Like when I and I'm sure it was true for you too. When I was a deputy sheriff, a local deputy, as soon as the bureau went to the 40 caliber Glock, I'm like, well, good, because we had the Smith& and Wesson 5906 back then, which was a 9 millimeter pistol, and I hated that thing.
I had one. I hated it. And because for folks who don't know, it's a double stack magazine. And if you had smaller hands, it was almost impossible. I had to carry one for 10 years and it was terrible.
Yeah, I
You
hated
know,
it. Well, that's kind of a side issue,
yeah,
but
that and trust us,
yeah.
that's a whole different deal.
So I hated that gun. So when the Bureau went to the Glock, I'm like, yeah, right on. We're gonna get the Glock. And yeah, it wasn't, maybe about a year later, they started issuing out the 40 caliber Glocks. So the Bureau has a far-reaching impact. That's my point.
Well, and let me just add to that, because I think another thing that people don't really know, the FBI does a lot of training of
Yeah.
local law enforcement as well. And that's, I think that's one of the responsibilities that the FBI has that people don't really know about.
The National Academy.
Well, the National Academy, and then also, I was trained by the FBI as a hostage negotiator.
Right. Mhm.
The FBI does regional training, and it's so they take information and skills that they have learned that y'all have been taught, whether it's after the academy, after Quantico, or during your tenure, and you share that with local law enforcement. And it was that's one of the things that had such an impact on me as a local police officer was I was able to, we in the Chicago area, we were fortunate where we had a lot of FBI agents that were phenomenal trainers,
Mhm.
and you would take their class and they would support your efforts in that particular skill even after the 40 hours of training was over. So yeah, phenomenal stuff.
Well, and a lot of FBI agents have come from local law enforcement backgrounds. So, you have this continual sort of give and take. At least I know it is now in particular. Even when I was working, I worked under three directors, so Mueller, Comey, and Ray, unfortunately. But even back then, there was a push toward enhancing and developing and maintaining our relationships with our local law enforcement partners. So that's always been important, but well, to a greater or a lesser degree. But now with Patel's focus on that, I think things have never been better in terms with our relationships with local law enforcement and
Well,
other partners too, other federal partners and international partners as well.
absolutely. And that's the last thing I want to talk about is um, recruitment. That's one of the things that you guys talked about, and part of that was recruiting from local law enforcement. Now we might call that poaching, but I had um, one of my best officers when I was running crime prevention went to the FBI, and the reason that he did that is because he got involved in a case, and that where the FBI was part of it, and he became really fascinated, did his research and things. But one of the things that you guys talked to the director about, and he was very open about, was the changes that the FBI is making when it comes to recruiting. And again, first of all the DEI crap is gone, from what
Yes.
I'm
Mhm.
understanding, which is,
Yes.
I detest
Mhm.
DEI hiring policies in any profession. And um but he was talking about, because here's what we were told when I was a young cop: if you want to be an FBI agent, you either got to go to law school or be an accountant. And I'm like, well, I don't have any interest in any of that, so I guess I'm not going to go to the FBI. And now the director was talking about getting rid of the DEI policies, but then recruiting people who are already cops,
Mhm.
college athletes,
Mhm.
things like that. He talked about those fitness standards, because
Mhm.
that's one of the frustrations that, and I'll just say this straight up, as a female, who got hired in 1980, despite being a female, not because of it, because we had to be in phenomenal shape. And now you will see in some of the federal agencies, most notably the Secret Service, you'll see these, frankly, terribly out of shape women, and you'll
Mhm.
see it in
Right.
local agencies too. And it's like, come on, we
Right.
need to, cops need to be athletes. We need to be treated like athletes. So the
Mhm.
director talked about, let's go for athletes. That makes total sense.
Mhm. Yeah, again, it's just common sense implementation across the board with Patel. So what he's done, to my understanding, is like people that have local law enforcement experience or other law enforcement experience that's taken into account. It's not a changing of the standards, it's not a lowering of the standards, but previous experience, I think, is taken into weighs more heavily in the balance. And I think it does change the track a little bit at Quantico. Like if you have relevant experience, I think the idea is that, well, why sort of repeat elements of training if these individuals already have it? So for some individuals, I think the actual time frame of Quantico has shrunk, but the standards have not changed, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So he's opened the doors to people from local law enforcement, the military, more of the traditional ideas of where the FBI got its personnel. Now, especially with regard to the DEI stuff, that was absolute poison to the Bureau. And we saw the change. I'm telling you, we saw the change in the culture with regard to the newer agents that were coming through. And as a supervisor, talking to other supervisors and talking to people responsible for training at Quantico, it was a marked difference, and it was disturbing to see.
Mm-hmm.
Now
Mm-hmm.
Patel has recalibrated how the Bureau looks at its hiring. So now we're getting, I'll just put it this, we're getting the patriots. We're not getting the
I
woke,
love it.
liberal, preferring people that are coming from liberal law school. Now, I went to law school. I graduated from Regent University School of Law. I like my fellow lawyers, nothing against them, but when you're bringing in a bunch of liberal lawyers to be FBI agents, that impacts the culture, right? Or if you're bringing people in just because they have an advanced degree from some liberal institution, because you're trying to fulfill a DEI quota, which were nothing less than racist and bigoted quotas,
Yes.
uh, it has a deleterious effect on culture. And FBI culture, business culture, doesn't matter where that poisonous program exists, it institutionalizes racism. Anybody that knows anything about DEI knows that to be true. So that's gone. One of the very first things Patel did was eliminate every DEI office throughout the entire bureau. So that was a huge change right from the get-go. So I'm really encouraged to see that. And young people before Patel, before Trump um, came into office, I would have young people ask me, well, should I be an FBI agent? Should I consider that as a career track? And I really had very mixed feelings about giving that advice because I had come through the COVID mandates and all that stuff. And frankly, I could have stayed maybe another 5 years, 6 years with some extensions. But I had come through the COVID stuff and making us test and all this junk. So I was eligible, and I'm like, I'm popping smoke right now. I'm done. It's time to go. So I would say now I am very encouraging of young people who are thinking about the FBI as a career, because the FBI is back on track. You've got a director who obviously cares about the rank and file, the brick
Mm-hmm.
agents, as we call them. And so I think now is one of the best times to look at the FBI as a career, because the Bureau needs good people, and the Bureau is getting good people. So I hope to see that trend continue.
Absolutely. I'll tell you, John, tell everybody again where they can find this entire interview, where they can read your column, where they can read the articles that are adjacent to this, and of course, where they can find you besides
Sure.
on Newsmax.
Yeah, Newsmax, definitely. I write for townhall.com, so you can find my archive there. I also write for another outlet called Restoration of America, or Restoration News. I have a column about the interview with Restoration News right now. I'm planning on another one coming maybe next week with Town Hall. And then the full interview, it's 52 minutes long. You can find it at the FBI's official YouTube account. Or if you'd like to go to my Substack account, you can find it there with some additional materials and some inside photographs that were taken that I thought were kind of cool. So if you're interested in some of more of that type of thing, you can go to my Substack to find that. So I'm on X, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook, LinkedIn, all that stuff. You can Google my name, and a lot of that stuff will pop up. So the interview is easy to find, and of course, I recommend everybody taking a look at it. And it was a pleasure having that kind of time with the director of the FBI. That's for sure.
Absolutely. John, thanks for all you do. And thanks for the time that you spent with us today. And if you'd like more information about the National Police Association, you can visit us at nationalpolice.org.
Every day, The brave men and women of law enforcement put their lives on the line to keep us safe. But they need our help to continue their mission. Activist politicians, progressive prosecutors, the ACLU, and the rest of the anti-police forces receive millions in donations from extremist pro-criminal elements like George Soros and woke corporations. The National Police Association is fighting them in courts around the country, including the United States Supreme Court, defending officers who are being attacked for doing their jobs. Additionally, the National Police Association works year-round to pass tough-on-crime legislation to put and keep criminals behind bars. Consider going to nationalpolice.org and donating to keep us in the fight. Together we can win. That is nationalpolice.org.